The story of Brainpower takes place in a distant future in which Earth has been afflicted by earthquakes and floods. The cause of these natural disasters is a giant alien spacecraft dubbed Orphan, which sits beneath the Pacific Ocean. Two scientists, named Kensaku and Midori Isami, work within Orphan in order to uncover its vast knowledge, reach the Earth's surface with the craft, and travel the galaxy, resulting in the annihilation of all life forms on Earth. Their research is aided by a group known as the Reclaimers, who are people that pilot living organic mechs known as antibodies. The Reclaimers seek to retrieve Orphan's vital disc plates, which are scattered across the planet. One day, a teenage orphan by the name of Hime Utsumiya comes across one of these plates, which revives into a special type of antibody known as a brain-powered. During a fateful encounter with the Reclaimer Yu Isami, who also happens to be the son of the orphan researchers, Hime takes up arms in the brain-powered and eventually escapes. A year soon passes, and Hime finds herself becoming a member of a resistance group dedicated to stopping Orphan from taking off into space, and is stationed on a battleship known as Novus Noah. It is here where she reunites with Yu, who decides to rebel against his family's ideals and escapes Orphan in a brain-powered. Throughout the series, Hime and Yu, along with the rest of the Novus Noah crew members, will lock horns against the Reclaimers in hopes of stopping Orphan from ascending to space and wipe out humanity. Whenever people look at Brainpowered, they usually just write it off as a bad show that rips off Evangelion. However, I find that the people who usually say that either did not watch the series all the way, or they just look at some of the negative reviews of the show online. Interestingly enough, even Tomino himself claimed that he came up with the idea of Brainpowered before Evangelion ever aired, though I find that to be a little hard to believe, as Brainpower does have some elements that felt somewhat inspired by Evangelion. An example would be the synchro tests that Yu's parents would perform on him and his sister Quincy, which resembles the system used in Evangelion. Ultimately, Brainpower does its own thing. For starters, it seems to present a heavy environmental message, as the Reclaimers have very little concern about what would happen to Earth and its residents if Orphan were to take off, as they seem to care more about becoming the new seeds of humanity. You would think that all of the Reclaimers are bad people for doing this, but in truth the majority of them have their own personal reasons for sticking with Orphan. Some members come from tragic backgrounds and joined with Orphan simply so they can have a place where they belong. Does it justify their actions? No, but it does give us a better understanding on why they do what they do. I also liked how the series explores some of the parental relationships that some characters have, and the effects that certain upbringings can have on a child when they eventually grow up. The two biggest examples being Jonathan and Quincy. In all honesty, guys, I didn't find Brainpowered's narrative to be horrendous. In fact, I actually thought it had some pretty interesting ideas. It's just a shame that they are bogged down with some problems. First off, let's talk about the dialogue, because dear lord, unless you are familiar with how Tomino writes dialogue, you will most likely be lost on quite a bit of conversations that the characters have, especially if you watch the sub version. This is mainly because I find the dialogue to be overly complex at times, and it can really throw new viewers off. Now, this problem is not exclusive to Brainpowered, as I believe there are a few other works written by Tomino that suffer from the same issue. The second issue I would like to bring up is the pacing. It was fine at first, but it definitely started to fall apart at the end, which ultimately led to what I felt was a very half-baked ending. My last issue with the series would have to be the characters themselves. They aren't bad characters, and the show definitely tried to progress them, but I find that many of them were underdeveloped, especially the female lead Hime, who I found to be a rather bland character when compared to her love interest Yu, who is probably the most well-developed out of anybody in the show. There are some characters that I could get behind though, particularly Jonathan, who has to be one of the most bizarre characters that Tomino ever created, and is unintentionally hilarious as he has the tendency to grab his own man boobies and says some of the most ridiculous lines in the entire series. Now, considering that Tomino was the director of the series, You can expect many tropes from his previous works to be present here. Examples include the mysterious masked man, the young bystander turned ace mech pilot, and the inclusion of young children, who I will admit are nowhere near as insufferable as the baby from Victory Gundam. Though two things that really stood out to me about the show was its tone and death count. Only 2 characters die in the whole series. I'm not going to name who they are, but considering that this was created by Killmonger Tomino himself, that says a lot about how much his attitude towards creating anime has changed since working on the Gundam franchise, and this new attitude can be seen in the tone of Brain Powered, which was more hopeful and positive in comparison to Tomino's previous outings. All in all, despite how bizarre the story and characters of Brain Powered felt, I genuinely thought it had some interesting ideas, and had it gone on longer and ironed out some of the problems it had, I dare say the story would be entertaining. But even with the problems it suffers from, I don't think it was as bad as certain people make it out to be. It may be a very weird show that makes you think Tomino was on some serious dope in the writer's room, but just because something is weird doesn't necessarily mean it's outright bad. I personally thought the narrative was okay at best, but I definitely thought the stories Tomino crafted in his previous mecha shows were far better. Visually, I thought Brainpower looked decent enough for a show made in the late 90s, but I have some complaints. First off, the art is rather inconsistent. There are times where it is incredibly detailed and looks absolutely stunning, but then there are moments where it looks older than it actually is. The character designs look alright for the most part, but they can also suffer from the inconsistency of the visuals throughout the series. The antibodies themselves are interesting. They definitely try to give off that organic look and have some unique abilities, such as being able to quickly teleport and uses mysterious organic energy to produce chakra shields or energy beams. However, I do have one problem with them when it comes to their designs. There are essentially 2 main designs in the show. The Brain Powered, operated by the Novus Noah crew members, and the Grantures, operated by the Reclaimers. My problem is that the majority of the mechs only come in one of these 2 designs, with the only difference that separates them being the color schemes, except for Rust Brain, who has the same shade of blue as U Brain, which really threw me off the first time watching the show. To be fair, there are a few mechs that are actually different, such as the Barons and Nelly Brain, which are actually really cool, but aside from that, it wouldn't have hurt to have included more unique mech designs. As for the animation in battles, they aren't spectacular and there are times where the animation can be kind of choppy, but they get the job done for the most part. Overall, the art and animation is adequate. The music is really good. The soundtrack itself was actually done by Yoko Kanno, and I consider it one of her more underrated compositions. The opening theme, In My Dream by Eri Shinkiyoji, is a very upbeat and energetic song, and I really like it, though I always have to wonder what the fuck is up with the opening sequence itself. It features the key female characters plastered throughout in the nude. Aside from a few shots of the mechs themselves, what does any of this have to do with the actual show? Well, aside from that blunder, the ending theme is beautifully composed, and I love every second of it. The Japanese version is okay. Not a lot of memorable performances here, honestly, though I did find Baron's low-pitched voice to be absolutely hilarious to listen to. There are a few notable seiyus here. Romy Park, or Paku as she is sometimes known, voices Kanan, and she would go on to voice Loran a year later in Turn A Gundam, which is funny because Hime is voiced by Akino Murata, who would eventually voice Soshi. Shinichiro Miki, known for voicing characters such as Kurz and Lock-On, voices Russ, and Kumiko Watanabe, who is most known for voicing Carrero in Sergeant Frog, voices Quincy. The dub is not completely horrible, but man, some of the lines spoken by the voice actors will make you cringe. Ah well, at least it has Kirby Morrow in it. Brain Powered was an interesting experiment. I actually commend Tomino for attempting to make his own organic mech series. Unfortunately, it doesn't come without flaws. The story can be hard to follow for first time viewers, many of the characters feel underdeveloped, and the visuals are at times inconsistent. It isn't all bad though, as I did like the themes it presented, and there are aspects of the series that I really enjoyed. Much like Victory Gundam, I think this is another case of you'll either enjoy the series or you'll hate it. Me personally, I ultimately liked this show for what it was, and I think a big reason as to why I think that way is because I am a die-hard Tomino fan. Though at the same time, I can't ignore the flaws it has, and that is why I can't consider it a super amazing show. It's still not a horrible series though. If you're yearning for a mecha anime that will offer you an out-of-the-box experience, then Brain Powered might have you covered on that. But if you're looking for an in-depth story with a memorable cast of characters, it probably won't offer you much in that regard. Final score, 6 out of 10.